So I don't know, whoever is ready for me, I'm here.
In 1 week, he called me like, I have a fight for you. And I started my journey there, and the rest is history.
Ilia Topuria, the undefeated UFC champion, just made a bombshell announcement that no one saw coming. He's leaving the UFC for the PFL. No injury, no scandal. Just a sudden, shocking exit that sent shockwaves through the fight world. But the real question is, what happened behind the scenes that led him to walk away? Let's dive into the full story. Just 5 minutes ago, Ilia Tapuria, the undefeated two-division UFC champion widely seen as the future face of MMA, dropped a stunning announcement. He's officially leaving the UFC and signing with the Professional Fighters League, PFL. In what's already being called the biggest transfer in MMA history, fans are calling it the end of an era. Reports say Dana White is furious, and the UFC roster is still trying to make sense of how their golden boy walked away, while still holding both of his titles. What's even more surprising is how the announcement came. No press conference, no ESPN exclusive, just an unexpected Instagram live session streamed to millions. Topuria didn't mince words. He called the UFC a cage, not a company, and said real fighters deserve real freedom. He thanked his fans, and when asked if this meant he was vacating his titles, he simply smiled and said, "The UFC made me famous, but the PFL will make me free." And just like that, the live stream ended. But the chaos had only begun. Clips of the moment are spreading like wildfire across social media. Commentators are already comparing it to the Ronaldo moment of MMA, when the sport's biggest star switches leagues overnight. But behind this move lies a deeper story. Contract disputes, secret negotiations, and personal tensions that have reportedly been building since his last fight. And now, the world's watching to see what happens next.
This guy, Ilia Topuria. And Ilia Topuria is one of the absolute best fighters in the world.
That was Joe Rogan himself praising Ilia Topuria. The same Joe Rogan who's now calling Topuria's move to the PFL a devastating blow to the UFC's future. And honestly, he's not wrong. In just the past year, Topuria became the UFC's youngest dual-division champion, dismantling legends like Charles Oliveira and Alexander Volkanovski with surgical precision. His rise wasn't just dominance, it felt like destiny. But behind the highlight reels and press smiles, trouble had been brewing. Insiders say Ilia had been at odds with UFC executives for months. Over pay, opponent choices, and creative control. After his jaw-dropping knockout at UFC 317, sources close to his camp revealed the UFC offered him a new 8-fight contract. But there was a catch. The deal demanded exclusive rights to his image and likeness across all media platforms, even outside sponsorships and endorsements. Ilia's response? Reportedly, he told them, "I fight men, not lawyers." He refused to sign. Instead, he began quietly negotiating with the PFL, the league that's been on a mission to shake up MMA ever since its billion-dollar merger with Relator. To understand how massive this shift is, you have to realize, Ilia's entire brand was built on loyalty and dominance. From the moment he entered the UFC, his ascent was nothing short of meteoric. Now, he's betting on freedom and shaking the entire sport in the process.
I had 4 fights when I started with my professional career.
That's how his journey began. Not with luck, but with relentless determination. In just a few short years, he rose to become the pride of European MMA, a fighter who embodied both unshakable faith and undeniable ferocity.
First thing I want to say is thank you, God. Everything I have, everything I am, and everything I'm gonna be someday, it comes from him, so.
But tonight, that same humility turned into quiet defiance. When fans asked why he would leave the UFC while still on top, Ilia responded with a line that's now echoing across MMA forums. Glory belongs to God, not to contracts. The UFC, of course, is trying to downplay the situation. But according to ESPN insiders, Dana White was completely blindsided during a recent media scrum when asked if Ilia would be headlining the upcoming UFC card on Paramount. Caught off guard, White only hinted at the star's involvement, clearly unaware of the storm that was about to hit.
Expecting you to say anything, but do you think there's a chance Ilia Tapuria could end up on that card? Big star.
It's a possibility.
That possibility has now turned into a full-blown nightmare for the UFC. because not only did Ilia reject their renewal offer, he did it while holding 2 belts, effectively breaching precedent for active champions. In a sport built on loyalty and brand control, this is the first time a reigning UFC champion has defected without losing a fight. The ripple effect was immediate. Fighters like Sean Ali and Belal Muhammad have already tweeted cryptic emojis. And Jake Paul Spowie, who has long criticized UFC's pay structure, just posted, "Ilia finally saw the light." But here's where things get even more shocking. This deal didn't happen overnight. Leaked internal emails first reported by MMA Junkie suggest that Ilia's management began talks with the PFL nearly 3 months ago, right after his call-out of Paddy Pimple.
Listen, I don't think that he's gonna accept it. But if he thinks that he's ready, come on, you blonde bring that here.
Behind the scenes, that fiery moment wasn't just for show. It was fueled by months of frustration. Topuria had been pushing hard for a fight with Paddy Pimblett, convinced it was a perfect pay-per-view blockbuster. But Dana White reportedly shut it down, calling the matchup too risky for Pimblett's market value. To Ilia, that was more than a business decision. It was a slap in the face. He later told reporters, "The UFC was protecting clowns instead of fighters." The PFL, however, saw that fire and moved fast. According to sources, they offered Ilia a multi-million-dollar deal that included something the UFC never would: full creative control. That meant cross-promotion rights, input on opponent selection, and the freedom to chart his own career path within reason. In short, the PFL gave him what the UFC wouldn't: autonomy. Insiders say this was the real turning point. Topuria is fiercely independent. He said it before, he doesn't care about weight classes or promotional politics. He just wants to fight.
If I'm walking in the street with my wife and someone says something to her, I'm not gonna ask him how much is your weight, how much is your reach or height or this or that. Like, I will stay there and I'm gonna take his head off. And this is how I think. Like, this is the fight business. I don't care how much is your weight.
So when Ilia Topuria tells fans that freedom matters more than fame, it's not just talk. It's his personal philosophy. The UFC may have built his global image, but the PFL just gave him something no contract could ever offer: the power to define his own legacy. This isn't just a fighter switching promotions. It's a statement against the very system that made him. And if the insider whispers are true, this is just the beginning. Unconfirmed reports suggest that 2 other UFC fighters, including one former champion, are already in talks to follow Topuria to the PFL. In the next part of this exposé, we'll break down the closed-door negotiations that made this deal possible, what it means for Dana White's empire, and the eye-watering amount of money the PFL reportedly offered to make Ilia walk away, at the very height of his reign. But before we get there, one question lingers. How did the UFC let this happen? Because if Ilia Tapuria, the undefeated 2-division golden child of MMA, can walk away without even losing his belt, who's next? How the PFL stole the UFC's biggest star by now? The MMA world is in chaos. From ESPN to Bloody Elbow, every outlet is scrambling to make sense of it. How did a reigning UFC champion walk away, belts in hand, without warning? One thing's becoming crystal clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated escape, one Topuria had been planning for months. And Dana White? He never saw it coming. Let's rewind. After his historic knockout victory over Charles Oliveira at UFC 317, Ilia Topuria was untouchable, undefeated, a 2-division champion, the UFC's fastest-rising global star. But even at his peak, the cracks had already begun to show. Behind the scenes, Topuria's management was deep in contract renewal talks with the UFC, a deal meant to make him one of the highest-paid fighters in the organization. But instead of a breakthrough, it became a battle of egos. Sources close to his camp claim the UFC offered Topuria an 8-fight deal worth roughly $8 million. Sounds big, until you consider that Ilia's pay-per-view fights had reportedly generated over $120 million in revenue. And that doesn't include merchandise or international broadcast licensing. Topuria asked for a share of the pay-per-view backend, a model previously given to stars like Conor McGregor. The UFC's answer? No. Only special draws got that kind of deal. And that's when everything shifted. He reportedly told them, point blank, "If I'm not special to you, I'll be special somewhere else." From that moment on, Ilia Topuria's loyalty to the UFC began to fade. Within weeks, the Professional Fighters League came knocking, and they brought something Dana White simply couldn't: real leverage. According to multiple reports, the PFL offered Topuria a 3-year deal worth between $40 and $50 million, along with a percentage of global pay-per-view sales and full creative control. That means Ilia can now choose his own opponents, co-produce his own fight documentaries, wear custom gear in the cage, something strictly forbidden under the UFC's uniform policy. But the real game changer? They're allegedly giving him a minority ownership stake in PFL Europe, making Ilia not just a fighter but an executive partner. If true, this isn't just the biggest deal in PFL history. It's the biggest deal in MMA history. Bigger than Francis Ngannou's move. Bigger than Jake Paul's boxing contracts. Bigger than anything the UFC has ever offered. Insiders say it all started quietly back in early August, when Topuria attended a sponsorship summit in Monaco. The UFC believed he was there as a guest of a luxury brand. In reality, he was behind closed doors, negotiating his future. What sealed the deal, according to sources, wasn't the money. It was the respect. A PFL executive reportedly told him, "We don't own fighters. We collaborate with champions." That single sentence hit home. To Ilia, the UFC had always felt like a system of control, from mandatory Reebok uniforms to strict limits on personal sponsors and branding. The PFL, on the other hand, was offering him autonomy. For someone as proud, vocal, and fiercely independent as Topuria, that was everything. And remember that viral moment when he called out Paddy Nimblest inside the octagon? That wasn't just about hype. It was a warning shot, and now we know why.
Listen, I don't think that he's gonna accept it. But if he thinks that he's ready, come on, you blonde. Bring that here. If he wants, bring that here. Bring him here.
That wasn't just trash talk. It was frustration. Topuria wanted the fight with Paddy Pimblett because it was personal. But Dana White allegedly shut it down, calling Paddy too marketable to risk against someone like Ilia. That comment, according to insiders, infuriated him. Someone close to his camp said Ilia put it bluntly, "If I have to beg to fight, I'm not a champion. I'm an employee." And that's what this entire saga boils down to: control. For years, UFC fighters have spoken out about low pay, restrictive contracts, and a lack of creative freedom. But none of them held the power to challenge the system, at least not while holding championship gold. Ilia just did. By walking away at the peak of his career, undefeated, undisputed, and with 2 belts, he sent a message to the entire MMA world. You can win without the UFC.
If I'm walking in the street with my wife and someone says something to her, I'm not gonna ask him how much is your weight, how much is your reach or height or this or that. Like, I will stay there and I'm gonna take his head off. And this is how I think. Like, this is the fight business. I don't care how much is...
That raw, no-nonsense mentality is exactly why fans love Ilia Topuria, and why the UFC ultimately lost control. Dana White's public reaction has been measured. He told media, "We wish Ilia the best. He's a great fighter." But behind closed doors, insiders say he's anything but calm. According to a leaked internal memo allegedly sent to UFC executives, Dana instructed management to freeze all future co-promotional opportunities involving PFL-affiliated athletes and to reassess the organization's brand control vulnerabilities. Translation: Ilia's exit rattled the empire. For years, Dana White has operated on a simple rule: if you leave the UFC, you fade. But that narrative is starting to crack. The PFL, powered by billion-dollar investments and rapid global expansion, is no longer just the other league. They've already absorbed Bellator, partnered with Jake Paul, launched PFL Europe, and now, by signing Ilia Topuria, the UFC's undefeated 2-division champion, they've officially stolen the UFC's thunder. Some fans are calling it a PFL power grab. Others are calling it karma. Because let's not forget, the UFC has a long history of high-profile clashes with its biggest stars. From Francis Ngannou's contract standoff to Nate Diaz's public fallout, this is part of a much larger pattern. Ilia Tapuria just became the latest, and arguably the most powerful fighter to break free from the system. Even Joe Rogan, a longtime UFC loyalist, seemed stunned by the news.
This is guy Ilia Topuria, and Ilia Topuria is one of the absolute best fighters in the world.
During a follow-up episode of his podcast, Joe Rogan reportedly said, "If the UFC loses fighters like Ilia, it's not about money anymore. It's about freedom. And that freedom is exactly what Ilia Tapuria has been chasing. He's said it countless times. He fights for honor."
Like, I will stay there and I'm gonna take his head off. And this is how I think. Like, this is the fight business.
That clip alone perfectly captures Ilia Tapuria's mindset. Aggression, pride, and unwavering confidence. He doesn't play games and he doesn't bend. That's why his move to the PFL feels less like a betrayal and more like destiny. But here's what nobody's talking about. Ilia's switch could trigger a chain reaction that reshapes MMA forever. The PFL's financial backers are reportedly preparing to lure more top UFC talent, not just with fight contracts, but by offering equity deals. In other words, they're turning fighters into partners. That's a business model the UFC can't easily compete with, because the UFC structure is built on ownership, not collaboration. If the PFL lands even half of these rumored signings, the UFC's monopoly could crumble within a few years. And who's next on their radar? Reports indicate they're already in talks with Khamzat Chimaev, Islam Makhachev, Sean Strickland, who's been openly critical of UFC management. This isn't just about Ilia Tapuria anymore. It's the start of a revolution. He's become the face of a fighter uprising. The man who proved that UFC brand power means nothing when fighters choose freedom over fame. Ironically, it's that very defiance that made him a star in the first place. In the next part of this exposé, we'll break down the fallout of Ilia's departure, how Dana White plans to retaliate, which fighters might follow Ilia's lead. Shocking new details from leaked PFL documents reveal just how far they're willing to go to dethrone the UFC. Because as of tonight, the fight isn't just in the octagon anymore. It's for the future of MMA itself. The aftermath of Ilia Tapuria's PFL defection. By now, the entire MMA landscape has shifted. This isn't just about Ilia leaving the UFC. It's about what his exit represents. For years, the UFC was seen as an unbreakable empire, the gold standard in MMA, the one organization no one could compete with. But in a matter of minutes, Ilia shattered that illusion. His move to the PFL isn't just the story of one fighter chasing freedom. It's the start of a war that could change mixed martial arts forever. And if you think Dana White is taking this lightly, think again. Multiple insiders report that the reaction inside the UFC's Las Vegas headquarters was nothing short of nuclear. Within hours of Ilia's announcement, an emergency meeting was called, where White allegedly told staff the UFC would never be blindsided like this again. A few hours later, an internal memo circulated ordering a complete audit of all active fighter contracts, especially champions. White reportedly told matchmakers to lock in every belt holder to prevent another PFL situation. To the public, Dana White remains calm and professional. In an official statement released through ESPN, he said, "Ilia's a phenomenal talent, and we wish him the best. The UFC continues to build champions. That's what we do." But that polished statement doesn't match what fighters inside the company are hearing privately. One anonymous lightweight contender told The Athletic, "They're panicking. We've never seen Dana this mad." He added, "Tapuria used us as a platform to get rich somewhere else. And honestly, he's not wrong. Ilia didn't burn bridges, he built a new one. And he did it outside the